Will you please turn to John 10? We're going to continue looking at this. Life is good if. Life is good if. And as we look at this, we're going to take a fairly serious topic, and it's serious, but unfortunately it can't be avoided, it can't be neglected, it can't be ignored, because Jesus, in this passage in John 10, we're going to be looking at from verse 7 down to verse 18, Jesus talks about this. He talks about a real devil. And we're going to see that Jesus has some very strong descriptions of the devil, our adversary. Let's look at these descriptions that Jesus has given us of our enemy, Satan. In verse 8, he's someone who thieves. In verse 10, he describes our enemy, Satan, as someone who seeks to kill, to lie, and destroy. You notice what Jesus is doing here? He's talking to his followers. He's saying, you guys are like sheep, I'm like the shepherd. You got to understand, there is a wolf out there. And he wants to lie to you. He wants to deceive you. He wants to eat you, destroy you, kill you, do whatever he can to make your life hell. But I don't want your life to be hell. I want your life to be heaven on earth. I want your life to be fantastic. But you got to know about this guy. How do you know if you're being deceived? How do you know? Unless you've got some objective measurement. So let's understand this about the enemy. Firstly, the enemy, Satan. That word Satan means one who opposes, adversary. He's opposing God. That's his name, Satan, the one who opposes God. He's a created being. Quite possibly he was an angel. Quite possibly he was either a cherub or an archangel. Quite possibly. At some point, something entered his heart where he said, I will take the throne of God. We read this in Isaiah and Ezekiel where it says, I will ascend and I will be like the Most High. If you really want to know what life is all about, if you really want to have the best that life has to offer, there's a certain door you've got to go through, and that door is Jesus. Was immediately banished from God's presence with that thought. And we could conjecture that up to a third of the angels went with him in rebellion. We haven't got anything absolutely categorical about that. We've got one reference in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, where it says, when this happened, a third of the stars fell from the sky. And most scholars say, well, that was a third of the angels of heaven went with him. And they became demons, ones who opposed God and his purpose. And many missionaries have come back from what we call the third world, probably more appropriately the two-thirds world, and they've come back and said, we saw things that we only ever saw in movies happen right before us. We saw people levitate. We saw people who were there and they vanished in front of us. And we saw strange sicknesses pronounced over people, and the next day that's what they got. We saw all this stuff. Tony shared at camp about some of the demonic stuff that was invested in some of the stuff that he brought back from a country outside of Australia. So there's very little doubt. Of course, you can be skeptical about everything, but I want to challenge you to be skeptical about your skepticism, that there isn't a spiritual realm. I think there is, and I think there's really good reason to think there's a spiritual realm, and Jesus is talking about it. And the question is Jesus reliable? Does Jesus know what he's talking about? So this being that fell, that was once called the star of the morning, who became Satan, Lucifer, at some point in God's creation of mankind, he enters the Garden of Eden. And he uses a serpent. He didn't morph into a serpent. He used a serpent. And somehow he communicated through this serpent to Eve and ultimately through Adam. But you know what's happening here? He communicated through Eve. Immediately he's undermining authority of the home. Now, if you're a staunch feminist and you go, that's not fair, we're all equal. Well, you take a number, get in line, see me Monday. But for right now, let's just assume that God created Adam to be the head of Eve. And if you've still got problems with that, that's 1 Corinthians 11. And he was the authority, not in a like this, but as the guardian, the protector, the provider, that kind of authority. And Satan bypassed that and went straight to Eve. And then he did it again when he said to Eve, "Has God said?" What's he doing? He's undermining God's authority now. He undermined the authority of the home. He's now undermining God's authority. And he undermined God's authority further when he said, "Oh, that's not true. God knows the moment you eat of this fruit, your eyes will be opened." He's undermining God's authority. God had said, "Don't do this." And Satan said, phooey with God. Undermined his authority. He undermined Adam, God's appointed authority. Then he undermined the word of God. Has God said? He undermined the word of God and God, the authority of God and the word of God. And this is really important because we see here that his strategy has not changed. He does it all the time. Jesus comes along and claims to be the exclusive embodiment of all of God's authority. Jesus said it. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. And Satan comes along and whispers in the ears of the intellectuals, "That's arrogant. Who does Jesus think he is? He's just one of many paths. You can have the Jesus kind of spirit by crossing your legs and twitting and circling your thumb and finger and chanting on your head. You don't need his authority." He does it today. And Jesus described him as a wolf. And the picture that we get is that when he challenged God's authority, he lied. He then did this. He tempted. Go on. Have a taste. One little bite won't hurt. Go on. Have a go. No one will ever know. Boy, was he wrong. It's in Genesis 3. We've all read it. Man, he tempts.